Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Deputy Mark Helyar, a member of the Guernsey States of Deliberation. Mark, thank you very much for granting me some time. Really appreciate it.
That's a pleasure.
Good.
Tony, pleasure.
Can you tell us where your role fits in with the current Guernsey government?
So I'm a member of the Policy and Resources Committee, which is the senior committee in Guernsey, and I've been appointed by that committee as the Treasury representative. So I'm responsible for all things tax and fiscal, but I also chair the Bailiwick Council, which is the liaison group between the states of Guernsey and the governments of Alderney and Sark.
Right, okay, so you've got a fairly good control over a lot of these things. Now, I had a quick look on your website, and you were a member of the Guernsey Party. Is that still in existence?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we're actually, I think, the only operational party. There was another party during the election called the Guernsey Party of Independence, which had a number of members. That still exists, but it only has one political member at the moment, which is Deputy St. Pierre.
Right. Okay. So it's a bit of a minority of one, as it were. Yeah. Is it working, the concept?
I'd have to be honest with you and say that parties don't work very well within the type of government constitutional system that we have. I mean, it's been really helpful because we're all first-time politicians to have a group of people to work with and to cry on the shoulder of sometimes, if I'm honest. And to learn what's going on in other parts of government, because I think if you're on your own and you just become a politician and you haven't made any friends, it's quite difficult to find out what's up and what's down.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the other thing, of course, is you're an Alderney homeowner, so you've got a bit of a close connection with the island.
Absolutely, I spend as much time as I can in Alderney. I think actually we would quite like to move to Alderney, but we've got young children at the moment that are at school, and that precludes it. But I think in the future we definitely consider that.
It's a long-term aim.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm an advocate. I'm a consultant at a local firm. I used to be a partner there, and there seems to be an opportunity in Alderney for an advocate's office at the moment.
Well, if you could come over before I die, that would be most helpful. Let's have a look at some of the topics that are going on in Alderney at the present time. One of which is, of course, biodiversity. You attended the drop-in, which sort of turned into a public meeting. And I'm just wondering quite how you feel. Should an interested non-government organisation propose laws, and how do you compare that with, for example, the Guernsey National Trust, who might wish to lobby the states of Guernsey on occasions?
I attended the meeting because I was in Alderney to start with, and a number of people had contacted me to ask me to go along and watch. So I went along really just as an observer because of that relationship that I have. Yeah. Not through any wish to interfere. Funnily enough, I'm also the chairman of the Citizens Advice in Guernsey, and we lobby government as well. We don't, as such, get involved with any sort of drafting process, so we're not embedded within government. So I think the answer to your question is it depends to the extent to which it's transparent that there is an embedding of a particular organisation within a government system.
Yeah, okay. You see, a lot of people over here think it's a backdoor way of forcing legislation by having these unrecorded drop-ins, whereas a public meeting, obviously, things go on the record and are taken on board for the future. You got any views on that?
Well, the representatives of the Wildlife Trust that were there, I spoke to Roland and some other people. They were very open about what their plans were, and it was a democratic process. People were invited, and a lot of people turned up, as it happens. So it was quite interesting, and it was done very politely, I have to say. I mean, there were clearly some people that were quite frustrated, but it was all done in good humour. So that, there was a democratic process going on there that I could observe happening. I think one of the issues for me was there was an explanation that this is potentially going to become Alderney government policy, and I can't interfere in that. That's not my business to become involved in influencing it. But I would just observe that if a government adopts a particular set of policies, then it has to make decisions according to those policies. So whether something is legislation or not is a moot point. If the government can only decide things in one direction, then you've pretty much got it embedded.
Yeah, well, this is the point, isn't it? As far as the setup is concerned, if, as the chairman of the General Services Committee said, no regulations, just guidance, that guidance can sort of be referred to in planning applications and all sorts of things in the future. So effectively, it becomes a bit of a quasi-law.
Well, that would be the case certainly in Guernsey. For example, if the government issues guidance about planning and makes policies to do with these types of issues, and then makes a decision that goes against that, members of the public can sue it for not making a reasonable decision based on its own policies. So it does create a ring fence around what government can and can't do and how it has to make its decisions.
As you were aware at that meeting, it was mentioned that there was a YouTube video still in existence dating back to 2020, where a civil servant for the States of Alderney was promoting the concept of the new laws. That video is still up and running, and you know, if you sort of just went into it, you wouldn't necessarily look at the date and you would think it was a current video. Should civil servants get that involved?
Well, I'm not responsible for Alderney civil service again, so I wouldn't.
Okay, if it was a Guernsey situation.
If it was a Guernsey situation, then there would be an expectation of an unbiased presentation of the facts.
Yeah. Okay.
Rather than promotion of a particular objective.
But it would be by a politician rather than a civil servant.
That would be the expectation, yes.
Yeah.
And if politicians do policy, that's
yes, quite.
Politicians.
Okay, let's move on to the Aldeny Runway. You've obviously you're aware of what's going on there, and the original plan to widen the runway but keep the existing length was showing at about £12 million back in 2019. That's now sort of probably inflated up to £15 million, and that's the only yardstick that we've currently got as to what the cost would be. Now, a lot of people are saying that the cost of the new airport could be in excess of £50 million. Is that an unreasonable number?
It's more than twice as much as the figure that I've seen, and the policy letter is being drafted at the moment. And so the number that I've seen for the extended version is 26 million, but that includes the 12 million that's already been approved.
Okay.
So the additional amount is significantly less than 50 million. I'm not sure. I mean, I know a number of groups have said that this is what the cost will be, but that's not. And I have to say, when the States of Guernsey does estimates, they've usually got an extra naught on the end of them.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm confident that that's an accurate figure.
And that would be CAA compliant.
That's my understanding. The primary argument around this policy letter when it gets to the States of Guernsey will be a value for money issue, not necessarily an Alderney economy or any of those sort of lifeline arguments. So it's very much an argument that Alderney itself will save sufficient money by consolidating its fleet, that this will pay for itself in a 10-year period.
Okay, but it's surely deemed as an economic enabler, isn't it? You could argue that case.
It is, but it's very, very difficult, as you might expect, to be able to estimate just what effect that might have. I mean, certainly, for example, if you've got larger aircraft and there's a bigger fleet of them, then you can flex your timings around times at which Alderney needs more transport availability, like Alderney Week, for example. That's an obvious benefit from it. And also maintaining the Southampton route, because those aircraft are more capable of doing that. Whereas I think if we end up with a situation where we don't do anything we've got to do something to the runway. I have to say, they very kindly let me have a wander around up there week before last, and I was really, really surprised by just how bad it is in the centre area, because you don't see that from the aircraft because it's underneath you. Yeah, but it's in a real state, and it definitely needs doing.
And derogations are not forever.
They're not. It's not an area that I particularly deal with in terms of the licensing, but the people that I've spoken to are confident that can continue.
Yeah. Okay. Looking at this question of running ATRs, they're getting rid of the jet, aren't they? Or thinking about getting rid of the jet. That means they'll have to buy another ATR to sort of make the Gatwick route work. So you're talking in terms of possibly another 1 or 2 planes to be added to the fleet if you're going to scrap the Dorniers. With that in mind, how many millions is that going to cost, Mark? Because they don't come cheap, ATRs, do they?
No, and you know, I think the decisions that have been made about aircraft purchases in the past, there are lots of reasons why those might have been the right reasons for those decisions, but I don't agree that we should be buying aircraft at all. We should be leasing them. So that they have a fixed cost, and if necessary, we can create structures that would allow people to invest in them. So they could be listed vehicles, for example, and the capital can be provided by third parties or the public, in fact.
Do you think you could make that one run? Because it seems to me, I mean, I don't know that much about aviation, but it seems to be a logical thing to do to lease.
Well, there are very few airlines in the world that own aircraft.
Absolutely.
And it isn't illogical for us to continue to own them. There's an awful lot of cost associated with the loan agreements, with interest, with wooden dollars associated with depreciation of the accounts, for example. A significant amount of the Alderney loss is depreciation of the aircraft and diminishing valuations. So a lot of it is really financial engineering. It's not real loss. It's just on paper.
Yeah. So from that point of view, if you lease it, you know what your monthly expenditure is going to be, you know how many years you're going to keep the aircraft, and you know that when you get rid of the aircraft after 10, 15 years or whatever, you start again.
Yes, and it also has other benefits. So if you buy, most aircraft are bought and sold in dollars.
Yeah.
So you've got an FX difference then that you don't need to hedge in your accounts, and if you don't hedge, you don't have those huge swings. I mean, the pound is at its lowest at the moment against the dollar for decades. So a swing in the accounts like that can make a very big difference if you're not hedging, and the hedging costs money as well.
Yeah. A lot of people over here are a bit concerned that we'll only end up with 2 services a day to Guernsey, you know, particularly from the medical point of view and this sort of thing. And the other thing, of course, is if the plane's only half full, it's not going to make any money, is it?
Well, the calculations that they've made, which is really the reason why I think STSB is going for the option, the C+ option, which is the extension, is that it does save money in the longer term for Alderney, because there are reduced PSO costs, and they're confident that it will make that money. In fact, you know, potentially they'll be able to move many more passengers by just doing 1 or 2 more rotations, for example, during July and August, when this year it's been extremely difficult, as you're probably aware, to get flights during that period. And I'm also very concerned about the medevac situation. It's quite unsatisfactory that, I mean, Alderney are doing their best to provide it because they've been mandated to do that, but whenever the aircraft is used for that purpose, obviously it goes out of service on the passenger flights, and so the disruption is huge. I think we had several weekends where, you know, on Saturdays where the aircraft wasn't available all day, and thank goodness that we had the Alderney ferry service step up, because those movements during the summer, I think, were key to a successful season.
If we are able to go for option C+, that would mean that the Medivac dedicated aeroplane could operate here. Guernsey pays a fee of so much a year, don't you? Somebody said $500,000 a year for the use of the aircraft. I think Jersey's $1 million a year. Where would that place Alderney, and who would pay for that?
Well, at the moment, Guernsey's picking up the tab for that. It's £1,500 per circuit, effectively. So I assume it would be consolidated into that, but one of the benefits of it is that you don't get the disruption on the passenger service. So there are knock-on benefits which are difficult to establish from having a different arrangement. But the aircraft that would come in, the one that we use from Bournemouth, which is a King Air, I think is fully equipped as effectively a mobile hospital. So it's quite different to just going on a stretcher in the back of the Dornier.
Yeah. So that is a definite plus point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, we'll have to just sort of wait and see how things turn out here. Are you aware of any sort of timeline that's been set for the
Well, I think
runway?
we're trying to. We've looked at some of the early drafts over the last few weeks, so we're hoping that it will be before the end of this year.
Yeah.
So that we will get a decision. But the real, the political battle hasn't really commenced yet. I have to say that not everybody in Guernsey is convinced that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I know that there are quite a few people in Alderney that feel the same way. One of the things that I've had to remind people in conversations whilst I've been in Alderney is, of course, that Guernsey is not responsible for providing an air service. It's only responsible under the 48 law for providing an airfield.
Yeah.
And those two things are quite different.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the problem is that, and I could accept it. I think a lot of people in Guernsey are going to sort of say, that's an awful lot of money to pay out for 2 planes a day, if Southampton's cut. And, effectively paying all that money for a ghost airport when, so much money could be spent on other more vital things at the moment, perhaps.
Well, that is the key issue. Politics is about the allocation of scarce resources, and this is a prime example of that. I mean, it does buy Alderney options for the future. So I think if we don't extend the runway, then we are stuck with small aircraft and a higher cost in the long term. And the Dorniers are not going to be there forever. So there would need to be a plan B, whether that be Twin Otters and no Southampton. I think that's probably the most likely outcome. That the people that are talking to me about not wanting the runway extended don't want that option either.
No. My objection, if I'm allowed to have one, is purely on the grounds of cost. But
absolutely,
because you have to have all these bolt-ons with it. You've got to have a new terminal building. You've got to have a scanner, security fencing, security lighting. It just adds up to an awful lot for, as I say, for possibly 2 flights a day. But anyway, let's move on from that. Coming on to taxation, which is obviously your favourite subject, bearing in mind you're heading up that side of the government.
Yeah.
Have you got an update on the proposals about goods and services tax and health tax versus health tax?
I have. So, in fact, we've got an update for states members and States of Alderney members in an hour and a bit. Ernst & Young are going to do a presentation about the work they've been doing on corporate tax. After the last debate that we had in the Guernsey states, there was a mandate from states members to do more lifting and turning of stones in that area. So we've been doing a lot of work on the corporate side. I think there is an opportunity there to raise more from the corporate sector, provided that we can take those in the finance industry along with us and demonstrate that it's not anti-competitive, and that will potentially reduce the burden on other areas of taxation.
You would agree that the imposition of GST is really a tax on the poor?
I don't agree with that, because the way in which we're looking to implement it in Guernsey would be combined with a total rework of the social security system. So for example, at the moment you start work and you have a job at £20,000 a year.
Yeah.
The minute you go over £7,762, I think, is the allowance for social security, you pay social security on all of that down to the bottom. So it's actually, the social security system is not designed to the benefit of the low paid.
Yeah. So
the idea would be to rejig that allowance so it's much more like an income tax allowance. So you have it, irrespective of whether you earn 20,000 or 30,000, and the allowances would be increased as well for income tax and for social security. So those at the bottom end, we calculate, would be 3 or 4% better off,
right?
Because they would not be paying so much tax.
Yeah. Okay. And the effect of inflation on that?
Well, this is the key issue at the moment. This is the thing that's really radically changed since we started the review on tax. It's difficult to see that states members, frankly, would approve any major fiscal change at the moment, given the burden on everybody in terms of increased prices. I think we've been very lucky. I think Alderney's been incredibly lucky as well in terms of fuel price, that we had this big blip in the price as a result of the Ukrainian war. It's gone back down again. So hopefully, I was looking at the potential for heating oil to be 2 or 3 times its price during the winter, but I think the last load that was delivered to Alderney was only 2p a litre different. So
Yeah.
I think we've been lucky in dodging that. But yes, it's going to be challenging.
Yeah. Part of the reason for the possible imposition of GST or social security surcharge or whatever was that you reckon you've got an £80 million deficit. Now,
yes, that's right.
Has that gone up as a result of inflation?
It will go up as a result of inflation. It's also going up because of pressure on services, particularly in health.
Yeah.
There's a shortage of nursing staff, and that's worldwide. That's not just in the Channel Islands. And that means that we're having to pay higher prices. It also means we're having to pay for agency staff, and they come at a significantly higher cost. Yeah. We have to pay rent allowances and so on, and that's having a real impact on the costs of government at the moment.
Okay. So from that point of view, you've got to raise some more money somehow, haven't you?
Yes, we've either got to do that or we've got to cut. Those are the two things. And I think in order to be able to carry the public with you in the kind of role that I have, you have to be able to generate trust that we are not wasting money on things that we shouldn't be doing. And that's the difficult balance that we have to tread at the moment. And I think we'll see some of that in the budget in November.
And as a policy, the states of Guernsey would never resort to long-term borrowing in the way that the UK works its economy.
Well, I did ask the question when I became Chancellor, was that, why can't we print our own money?
Yeah.
That's the real problem, is because we're in parity with sterling, every time the Chancellor in the UK prints some cash, the value of our money goes down as well, but we don't get the benefit of the cash. So yes, it's long-term borrowing. That is one of the ways to structure it, but you need to have a way to repay that. And at the moment, the government finances are not structured in a way which would allow that type of system to be implemented. But I think the other problem, Tony, is that you need a quid pro quo for it. You need government to be reasonable in terms of what its spending will be. And so that needs to be very closely under control.
Open checks in governments are not a good idea.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people speak to me and they say, well, you could do this and you could do that. And I said, well, you don't understand the government system. Yeah. I only have one vote on P&R and I only have one vote in the Assembly. It's a committee of 40.
Yeah.
That's an extremely unwieldy system to have any control.
I was interested to note, though, that you are sort of looking at the corporate side, because 010, I think, as far as a lot of people are concerned, has been an absolute pain if they're operating within the Guernsey income tax area. But if they're operating without, in other words, the shareholders, for example, live in Jersey or something like that, you don't collect anything on the dividend, do you?
It depends what that particular business is doing. So if it's Guernsey source income, for example, then that would be subject to tax. If it's rental on property, then that tax is paid in Guernsey at 20%. So there is a kind of myth in Guernsey that there are lots of external owners of property and domestic property and so on. It's only 0.4% of the total. Okay. So it's a very, very small amount.
Okay, I'll give in on that one. But obviously, global corporate tax is being reviewed at the moment. We've had, high-level global meetings suggesting a minimum 15%. And I suppose, you'd have to sort of structure it around that, wouldn't you? You could sort of go too low, otherwise you'd be a rogue state.
Yeah, so with that is one of the things that's been taken into account in the tax review, is that we're assuming that OECD move towards a minimum corporate rate will apply at some point, but there's a big dichotomy in EU that Hungary is blocking it. It needs to be a unanimous vote in the EU. So last week, Germany, France, Italy, I think the Netherlands decided they were going to go it on their own and say that they were going to implement it anyway. So I think that the USA has started to go a bit quiet on it and started to backpedal a little bit. So it remains to be seen whether and how it will be implemented.
Gotcha. Now, one thing that a branch of the civil service that you're probably in charge of is Guernsey Revenue Service.
That's right.
I've speak to them from time to time about my personal matters, I really get the impression that they are very dispirited. I really think they regard themselves as the Cinderella of the civil service. And I think that's a great shame, because you've got some good people working there. And really, it's all about money in before you can get money out. And I had a situation personally where, I was not getting assessments from 2017. I think that's something that really needs, looking at, isn't it?
Yes, and I mean, we did do a press release actually in July, and the media decided to find the worst possible way to report it. The reality is that I had a lot of complaints like yours, Tony, about things being way behind schedule. And so we asked in P&R for a report on that. We had a report. It was clear there was under-resourcing and that they weren't going to be able to catch up. The other issue is that we've implemented, the last government implemented a new computer system which isn't fully functional, which means that they're effectively doing it two different ways.
Yeah.
We collect 70% of our income tax from ETI receipts, so that is automated. It doesn't involve any sort of human intervention, but the rest of it was way behind. I'm really pleased to say that they pulled the stops out this year. You might have noticed, and I think probably several other people will have noticed, that they've had assessments or catch up is happening. They've done 5,000, I think it's the end of June, they've done 5,800 additional assessments above what would normally be the case. Particularly by bringing in either retired staff or people from the big four accountancy firms. Once they've finished their audit season, they've been brought in to help catch up, because they fill the forms in on the other end. So inputting the data by hand, though, is very laborious. And so that does need to change. And we're unfortunately going to have to invest some more money in making sure that system is fit for purpose.
Speculate to accumulate, Mark.
Well, you're right. You are right, though, Tony, to identify it, because I think you're right. It is much unloved. They do work very hard, and they're the kind of Millwall of the government system.
Absolutely. And really, in my view, because they get the money in so you can spend it, they should be at the top of the tree, not the bottom.
Well, that's right. And if they don't collect the money, there's no services at all.
That's right. Yeah. Can we then now turn to accommodation? Because I think both islands are suffering from a housing shortage. Any views on how it can be fixed? I mean, there's plans for fairly big developments on Guernsey.
Yes, I went up to the factory which is likely to build the Leal's Yard development, which is going to be nearly 400 units of accommodation, and that's going to be a modular build. I think if you use the term prefab, everybody thinks of those nasty concrete things and the Nissan huts from the end of the
yeah,
war.
Absolutely.
But, this is a very different operation. They can, once they've put the footings in, they can build a 4-bedroom house in 4 hours.
Yeah.
It comes off the back of the truck. Everything's in there: the plumbing, the electrics, the kitchens. It's all literally ready to go. And it would be great if we could include Alderney in that process. So because it's actually Alderney's better jurisdiction to do modular than Guernsey, because you've got quite a lot of room in the harbour, you've got a lot of room along the front and Platseline and what have you. It would be relatively easy to build and at quite a reasonable price. So we have been having discussions with the States of Alderney as to how we do that together if we can.
That's good news. Guernsey local market rentals are catching up with the bottom of the open market. This is another problem that you've got with inflation, isn't it, Mark, in terms of housing costs?
It's inflation, but it's a supply and demand problem.
Yeah.
My view, I mean, we've got a policy in Guernsey. I don't know if all viewers will be aware of it, called GP11. So if you're a developer and you have a site of more than 20 properties, you have to offer 30% of what you build up to the GHA as affordable housing, and that it just doesn't work. Not a single property has been built under that policy, and we now find ourselves in a position where the government is having to buy these large sites in order to get these things done. I think we're just reinforcing a defeat. I think we should be getting rid of that policy and allowing the market to sort it out. And the other thing is we've got a lot of agency staff that are taking up local residential slots.
Yeah.
There are literally hundreds of staff now living in local property who are blocking it for local residents and driving the price up because government's paying higher rents.
It's one of those things that, you know, you sort of say, well, let the market sort it out, but sometimes the market doesn't really sort it out as well as one hopes it would. I mean, one thing that I put to politicians over here in terms of first-time buyers is that you charge a very, very low rate of congee on the completion of the purchase, but take a charge or a bond on the property whereby the balance is paid at the time you sell it.
Yes, that would be a good way to defray it. In fact, we're looking at something similar, not similar in Guernsey, but significantly reduced rates for that type of purchase.
Yeah. Now, are you able to talk about Alderney governance reform? I've only got a few minutes left, actually.
I can do if you like.
You can count it out if you like.
The government of Alderney is in purdah at the moment because you've got elections coming up. So yes. I wouldn't want to interfere in the election process by making any pronouncements. And I'd have to say I'm appearing today personally. I'm not appearing as a representative of PNR.
But as an Alderney homeowner.
Yeah. I think the idea of having a discussion together to try and change the way that we work together, and that would include Alderney's own government structuring, is a really good thing.
Yeah,
I think it's way past time that we did that. And my sense from speaking to people in Alderney is that they want to see change as well. So I think change is to be welcomed, or at least having the discussion about it is a good thing.
I think this is one we'll have to keep for the future. You know, perhaps we can have another chat about it at some later stage when the proposals are perhaps a little bit more out and about. But I would say that Alderney public apathy is at an all-time low. And that really, I think, is a scary situation to be in.
It's a real shame. I think we were in a similar position in Guernsey prior to the last election, and island-wide voting really brought a resurgence of interest in representation, and it brought people like me into government. I wouldn't have stood in the old parish system.
No.
It's much easier to create a platform on an island-wide basis than it is on in a district, and so that's been really helpful. So I'm very keen, and we have a very good working relationship, I have to say, with the States of Alderney, which is perhaps somewhat different to the way things have been done in the past. But yeah, my view was always, if you've got a friendly relationship, you can have difficult conversations. Whereas if you don't have a friendly relationship, it's the whole thing is difficult. Full stop. So
it's Houston, we have a problem.
yes, that's right. So no, we are talking and working very closely together.
Yeah.
I get on very well with all the States of Alderney members, and we don't have any difficulties, and that's the best way to resolve problems.
Mark, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Many, many thanks for sparing me some time, because I know you're a very busy gentleman, and hope that we can meet up and have a chat at some future date.
Good, that's great, Tony. Thank you very much.